I hope you got some coffee and ready for some learning. This is our legal considerations panel. And so in this panel, we're going to be talking about all of the legal considerations around ancestral land return. Some property law 101 basics, some risk and liability considerations, taxes, arm of tribe corporations, establishing land trusts, etc. Right? So this is, you've got a legal question. These are your experts. I'm so excited to have our panelists joining us here today to think through all of those nitty-gritty logistics of ancestral land return. Our hope is to make this a informative, useful panel that you can take this information home and work closely with your tribes to advance ancestral land return. So we have some PowerPoint presentations lined up, but we hope to have plenty of time for questions and answers. So I just welcome you all to think about, if you got any questions that come up, write them down, and we'll get into them. I'm very much looking forward to this panel today because we have, I think we all know that our laws and institutions weren't built for tribes, right? They were probably built to exclude, alienate lands, and forcibly remove tribes. And so that's the current system that we've adopted, or not adopted, but are living in, right? And navigating as we think about ancestral land return. And I think that we desperately need to have the conversation about how do we change those laws, how do we change those policies to get out of the way of ancestral land return, to ensure that it's easier and we can put the world back and we can heal and move forward in a good way. I also think that it's really important for us to acknowledge for today's conversation, for today's training, that this is the system we're navigating at this time. And there are tools and resources available to return the land, to start healing in that existing system while we are working to change it. And when I think about that and when I reflect on my own role in this space and thinking about those future generations, I want to know that I did the best I could do with the tools I had while still pushing that envelope and pushing for the change that we'd like to see. And so why I'm very excited about the three panelists here joining us here today is they are created great presentations to explain the existing system that we are operating in, identifying those tools that you can use now for that ancestral land return. And then we hope to do a little teaser, a little conversation about where we would like to see the future go. But our hope is by the end of this training, you have more resources in your back pocket to support your tribes in advancing that ancestral land return. So I have the fun task of doing probably a semester's worth of property law in 2 minutes, but wanted to just give a quick high-level intro to some fundamental basics of property law because those tools in that property law toolbox can be used for ancestral land return. And it's the terminology that land trusts, that nonprofits, that the state of California, federal government are using in this space, and wanted to ensure that we're all coming together, understanding and using the same terminology. I know that there's folks in this room that are experts and have been doing this for years, but others might be new to the property law, property acquisition space. So wanted to just provide a quick run through. I know it's not going to feel in-depth enough, but part of the Tribal Stewardship Strategy Toolkit that we're putting together is to have resources there for self-study and for learning and training your staff. And so the notebooks that you received have a sticker in the front cover. That's going to take you to that website. That's that ever-growing toolkit website for those resources. So you can get into the details of what I'm about to run through at your leisure. So please feel free to use that. So we can do the next slide, please. Maybe the next slide. So seeds of land return. And this is a great toolkit, and thank you so much, Michelle, for highlighting this one with me, that provides a high-level understanding of property law. And the Sustainable Economies Law Center has done a lot of work in this space. And I was clicking around their website and was like, oh man, there's so much good stuff here. So definitely check that out, and we have linked to their resources in our toolkit. So that's at your fingertips. So if we can do the next slide, please. So there's a lot here, and I'm just going to very quickly run through it. But how the Sustainable Environmental Law Center broke this out into the different tools in that property law toolkit are in 3 categories: sharing the space, arranging for future title transfer, and then actual transferring title. So these are the different tools that your tribe can use depending on the outcomes that you would like to see. Now we know that the gold star, the end goal for tribes is total control and ownership of your ancestral lands. That makes perfect sense. That's what healing is. But maybe that's not available at this moment. So maybe there are other tools in the toolbox that your tribe can utilize to ensure your members can have access to those lands, can start harvesting those important resources. Maybe mapping it out so when that landowner does pass in that person's deed, it goes to the tribe, right? There's many tools in that toolbox that you can use working towards that ancestral land return. So we can do the next slide, please. So the land access agreements, boiling it down, land access agreement says you can come onto this land for X purpose. You can negotiate that with a landowner. You can build in that access agreement for those detailed purposes, times, activities, etc. State Parks is doing a lot of great work in this space with their MOU program, detailing out tribal access to state park lands, tribal use, harvesting on state park lands. But private landowners can also develop these land access agreements as well. You can do the next slide, please. A lease. The boiled down version of a lease is you can have exclusive use of this area, right? I'm going to lease this corner of my property to a tribe to complete this work, or to build a structure, or to maintain traditional foods. Another tool, if you can do the next slide, is an easement. To boil down an easement is you can have certain rights or relationships to this land permanently. The most, I think, common easement that folks are familiar with is telephone lines, right? If you have a pole in your backyard and there's a broadband or telephone line, the utility, oh my goodness. The utility entity owns an easement to have those lines and those poles there. My voice just went out. I'm so sorry. The next slide, please. So the next tool in that property toolbox is a purchase right. So to boil that down is you can purchase this land from me for X a dollar when however that landowner determines it, right? So a purchase right can be a tool where you can purchase this land from me for $20 when I walk on, right? And you can have that contract, you can have that agreement in place, and then when that person passes away, you've already purchased that right for that land transfer. The next one, please. You have a life estate. A life estate is a tool in that toolbox that the remainder interest of the land belongs to you, meaning you will receive full title upon my death. So this is another tool in that toolbox where you can create a deed document and set that up. Excuse me. Next slide, please. I do not know where this cough came from. I'm so sorry. The next slide is an estate gift. So this is basically a bequest. This is somebody is gifting property to someone. It does not create an immediate relationship of the land, but it does arrange for the land to transfer after your death. So can you tell there's like a theme here that property transfer, when somebody walks on, when somebody passes, there's a whole probate process. There's a lot of transfer of land. So there's a lot of tools in that property law toolkit to support transfer of property when somebody passes. And we're seeing more and more people wanting their private property being returned to land after they've passed. And so these are tools in that toolkit that your tribe can negotiate with private landowners, so they can live out their lives in their home, but instead of it going to their heirs or being sold, they can build in structures into their will so it can be returned to tribes. The next slide, please. You also have a gift. This land is yours now. I want nothing to do with it. Here's the keys, right? That's a gift. Next slide, please. Then you have the simple sale. The simple sale is that fee title transfer. If folks are familiar in buying a house, right, that's that simple sale. You go through the real estate transaction, you pay the taxes, you get the keys, you now own it. And then the next slide, please. Transfer and retain relationship. So this one is, this land is yours now, but I want to retain a relationship to the land or another right. This could be, I'm returning the land to you, but I would like to live out my last few years in my home on this land, but the tribe already owns it. But I'm retaining a right to be on that land until my death. Or I'm returning this land, but I want to ensure that my family, my heirs, can hike on a trail that's really important to my family. Or I would like to still, my great-grandfather planted this apple tree, and I would like to come back every year and pick those apples, right? So it's retaining a right to utilize the land or live on the land, but the tribe would be the title holder and owner of that land. So I'm hoping this panel will correct anything if I misspoke on anything, but that is a quick run through of the many tools in that property law toolbox. I'm already thinking we need to just do a more deep dive into all of these pieces, because that's going to be really essential as you're wanting to explore options for land return in your own space. So this is just a little teaser. Definitely visit the website for more information. But I wanted to just quickly run through that, but now let's get to our esteemed panelists. See, where am I? Oh, not here. So as introduced, this is our legal panel where we're talking about those legal considerations for ancestral land return. We have three amazing speakers here today that work in this space day in and day out, represent tribes who are exploring their options in ancestral land return and even going through them and closing on property. So I'm so excited that folks are here today. We have Sarah Clark from Shute, Mahali, and Weinberger. We have Scott Williams from Berkey Williams. And we have Michelle Lee from Circle Law Group. Yeah. So we're going to dive into our PowerPoints, and we're starting off with Michelle. And Michelle, feel free to introduce yourself how you would like to.
Okay. Yeah, hi everybody. Before I introduce myself, I really love the giving. There's like a giveaway element to all of this, and I think that's the spirit that we're in, is there's this giving and then there's receiving. And so sometimes it's hard to give and sometimes it's hard to receive. People have their own issues with it, but giving and receiving is a really important concept in Native communities. And in the spirit of that, there's a bunch of candy bars downstairs that I brought in the spirit of giving, because giving is a love language, and I really love the topics that we're talking about. They mean a lot to us. I mean, they're so important. So yeah, if you like chocolate, there's some chocolate bars downstairs. My name is Michelle Lee, and I am a member of the Pit River Tribe from Northeastern California. I'm also a descendant of the Maidu people from around Greenville, and I am Kaweah from the Cabazon Band of Mission Indians. My grandparents met at boarding school, and that's how that happened. My ancestry in all of the areas, I can trace it back to contact, and I know that our family, our people have survived genocide. They survived massacres. My great-great-great-great-grandmother survived what's called the Battle of the Infernal Caverns up in northeastern California. And because of her resilience and her wit and her intellect, she got out. And it's because she got out that I'm here today. So these issues are very important to me. I'm an attorney. I've been practicing in this sphere for about 25 years. I do a lot of gaming and other type of traditional Indian law work, but my real love is the land. And so part of my representation of Indian tribes traditionally is in land acquisition in a different format. So anyway, I guess I'm going to get ahead of myself if I don't get into the slides. So this is what I believe. I believe that our tribal lands need to be retired. They've been working for other people for generations. They were taken and they were used for collateral to fund colleges, to fund companies, PG&E, all of the utilities. Development of all kinds of things across the whole country was collateralized on tribal land that was taken. The UC and state colleges, the state of California collateralizes it still today. There's resource extraction, there's mining and logging, and all of those activities used the value of the land and gave it to other people and took it away from indigenous people as a homeland and as a place of respite and of culture and of religion. So they were grabbed and they were put to work immediately. Today there's land-grant colleges, Dartmouth, Ivy League colleges. Those colleges were built by collateralizing the land that they were granted in California. So there are the web of utility of our lands goes to other countries even. So I believe that our lands need to be retired from working for other people. And one part of this working it today is property taxes. And so I'm going to talk about property taxes, but that's the context that my headspace is when I'm talking about this. So yeah, our next slide here is the tribal lands and state taxation. So traditionally, when I first started practicing Indian law in the late 90s, there were two ways. We really didn't see a lot of unrecognized tribes, 25 years ago. We knew they were there. I knew people that were unrecognized tribal people, but they weren't a part of the legal work, their legal practice, that there's so much that's changed now. So the work was really with recognized tribes, the federally recognized tribes, and there was two ways to avoid tax if you were a federally recognized tribe. And one was to convey the land to the United States into trust for the benefit of the tribe. We call that fee to trust, land into trust. And so a large portion of my work in Indian country was in advising tribes that were acquiring land, these recognized tribes, and they would acquire the land, and then we would initiate this fee to trust process. And that's a whole process I'm not going to get into, except for that the end result is the land is owned by the United States for the benefit of the federally recognized tribe, and it is no longer taxed. It's taken out of that taxation model. And so it's interesting that we have land and trust, and then we have land trusts, right? Because they're kind of two analogs, but they're different, but there's some concepts that are similar. And then the only other way to have a property tax exemption for a recognized tribe today is to apply for California's Section 237 Tribal Low-Income Housing Tax Exemption. And so some tribes may not know that they can acquire land in fee and build low-income housing on that fee land, and then go through a process under Section 237 to have the land non-taxable. So you don't have to take it into trust, but you may. And so the 237 process, there's restrictive covenants. So in that way, it tracks a lot of these land return things that we're talking about here today. It's because most of them require these restrictive covenants. And a restrictive covenant is something in the deed, in the chain of title, that restricts that overall use. And for those of you that may have heard of a bundle of sticks, right? We say property rights are a bundle of sticks, and each of those sticks is a different type of right. And so a restrictive covenant, you take away some of the sticks, so there's some things you can't do on that property. And I want to note that the nonprofit organizations, they benefit from a number of state property tax exemptions that the federally recognized tribes can't or struggle to achieve because they're not nonprofits. So there's the nonprofit model, and then there's the federally recognized tribe model, and there's pros and cons to each of them. So next slide. We know today now we know about non-federally recognized tribes. We know that you're here. We know that and a big part of that is because of SB 18 and AB 52 and the laws that we've built in the last 20 years to recognize ancestral ties and Aboriginal ties to your Aboriginal lands, even if you are not federally recognized. It's about a cultural tie to the land, and the state has worked. I shouldn't say the state has worked, but the tribes have worked with the legislature to codify these connections and allow for consultation, and that has really given rise to the visibility of a lot of unrecognized tribes. And then as a result of SB 18, SB 18 first established that a California Native American tribe, which is either any tribe in California, could hold a conservation easement. So it amended the government code, section 815, that's now said a California Native American tribe may hold a conservation easement. And the reason why we put that in SB 18 is because that would be an outcome of consultation, right? So a tribe is in consultation with a local government, and they want to take that land, and they want to protect it. A conservation easement might be a mechanism, a way to protect that land. And so now, tribes are starting to get used to these conservation easements, and then now we're kind of getting into that next stage. So next slide. So again, there's been these sort of eras, right? You have rancherias and reservations established, you have land into trust processes for the recognized tribes. Then we start getting land return through these conservation easements, these baby steps, and now we're in, thank you, Chairwoman Gould, for speaking this morning. I mean, rematriation becomes an idea, in large part because of your work. And then we have Truth and Healing Council, and now we have these new funding programs through CNRA. So we have this whole shift into land return and acquisition, but there's a problem, and that's the next slide, is the tax problem. So while there's all of these funding programs to now reacquire land, or there's people gifting land, or local governments and counties agreeing to land return, what does that mean financially? So what the real property loss or system does is when there's a transfer from one party to another, there's a reappraisal, there's a reassessment of the value of that land. So all that time, if land's been, working for somebody through conservation or through collateralization, it's been sitting maybe for generations, right? Some of these big land returns that are thousands of acres, that property's been under timber harvesting or something, where that land hasn't been appraised in a long time because it may go all the way back to the land grab, to the 1800s, to homesteading. And so the value, when it gets reappraised on this new transfer, is significantly higher than the value that it was under the prior owner. And that means that the property tax values go up. And that means that whoever acquires it is now going to have to pay property taxes at a higher rate than the original owners, which is ridiculous, right? It's ridiculous that, and I skipped already to my next slide. So the stepped up value, it's a stepped up basis. So the new appraisal values are higher. You get a stepped up basis. And what that means is that when you're doing your taxes, what is the value of your land, and the value when and whether it's through a probate or a will or any type of transaction, once that deed transfer occurs, the county, even pulling a permit, believe me, I'm building a swimming pool and they are on me. They are on me about when is that pool going to be done, because they're going to be taxing me for that pool because my property value is going to go up. So they know, and they being the assessor, they know they record all of these things. They're hand in hand with the recorder's office. And when that transaction's happening, a permit's crossing the desk, a transfer's happening, there's a stepped up value. And so shamefully, tribes will pay a higher property tax than the previous owner unless you do something about it. So that's the next slide. And I need to hurry up. So documentary transfer tax is when you purchase, transfer property, there's a P-Corps form. It's a property change of ownership form. And that change of ownership form identifies whether there's going to be a tax associated with that transfer. And that transfer tax is going to be, it's just what it says, it's just to transfer the document. So you are buying your land or transferring it, and you have an escrow, and then the escrow is going to take those documents to be recorded at the assessor's office, and the assessor's office is, the recorder's office, and the recorder's going to be conferring with the assessor's office, and they're going to say, well, what's the tax on this transfer? There's not exemptions for these transactions. So what that means is, unless you can squeeze into some exemptions, and we've done that, we've had to really, really work to make the certain exemptions fit. And it's hard to see it, but these ones on the bottom, they were examples of exemptions. So it's where it's a gift, or where it's a transfer to within a family trust. So you have to think, I would suggest thinking about this before you get to the recorder's office, because you want to make sure your escrow process will line up with one of these exemptions. Otherwise, you're going to be paying a percentage of your purchase price. So if CNRA is paying for $3 million for an acquisition, and the appraisal was $2.8 million or something, you might be paying a lot of money just to record it. So please keep an eye out for that. The next slide is the property tax welfare exemption. And I'm not going to have time to get into all of this detail, but I'm going to just identify it, that there's this exemption for nonprofits. And I also ripped off the Sustainable Economies Law Center, because why redo it when they did it so perfectly? There is this property tax welfare exemption for nonprofits, and it's possible that tribes could do it, but I haven't tried to do that yet. But you have to be a qualifying entity, and so you have to have the purpose of your organization be charitable, hospital, religious, or scientific. And then the property has to be used for one of those purposes. So of course, restrictive covenants will count. Next slide. But the process is it's technical, and there's some people in here that probably know it, and it's not easy, and it can take years. And while you're doing this process, you're going to be paying your property taxes at that stepped up basis. So you want to do this as soon as possible. And there's an organizational clearance certificate you get from the State Board of Equalization. And then there's also an application that you have to submit to the assessor, the county assessor. So please think about these things before you get to your writing escrow instructions and your purchase agreement and all of that, because the language in your purchase agreement is going to be reflected in your escrow instructions, And all of that's going to play into these forms. So you really want to look at them as a package. Next slide. And this is just more of that information. And you can skip to the next one. So one point I wanted to make is that revenue generating activities consistent with the instruments are allowed. And I'm going to go to the next slide and then stop, because I think we can address some of this in the questions, and I've talked for a long time. All right, so thank you. We'll have questions later.
Thank you so much, Michelle. Really appreciate it. And I know that we went through that PowerPoint really quickly, so I just wanted to assure everyone you will get a copy of it. So yes, those resources will be shared. But now, Sarah Clark.
Great, thank you. And Michelle, good segue for some of the stuff that I'm going to cover. So my name is Sarah Clark. I'm a partner at a public interest law firm called Shute, Mahali and Weinberger. We're located in San Francisco. Very briefly about me, for a long time my practice was kind of segregated into two camps. I worked with tribes on protecting cultural and natural resources, and I worked with land trusts on sort of traditional Western land trust practice. And I thought to myself, these two things need to come together, and I'm very pleased that in the last about 8 years I've been working with a number of tribal land trusts to try and marry these two ideas together. So I am going to cover two topics relatively quickly. I don't have a PowerPoint. And then certainly we'll have time for questions at the end, hopefully. So the two topics I'm going to talk about are managing risks and liabilities for land trusts and for tribes in rematriation. And then I'm going to talk about specifically the ways that non-federally recognized tribes can use nonprofit organizations as a mechanism for facilitating rematriation. So to start with, on the risk and liabilities, when Geneva asked me to talk, I said, well, are you talking about risk and liabilities before you acquire a property, or are you talking about it after? And she said both, so I'm going to try and do both. So in that pre-acquisition phase, what you are looking at is trying to understand really what you're getting yourself into. And I will say I have had a number of clients just in recent months who have called and said, exactly what Geneva said might happen. Hey, there's a landowner, they seem really nice, they just want to gift us the property. They don't want us to understand what's on it, there's no process in place, but they're going to give it to us. Should we just accept it? And as much as I love that story, and I would hope that that would work out, as a real property attorney, I think to myself, oh my, why are they gifting it to you? Is it really coming from the goodness of their heart, or are they trying to get rid of a piece of property that they know that there's risks associated with? So the ways that you go about understanding what it will be like to be a property owner and what risks and liabilities you're taking on is through a process called due diligence. That's a legal term, but it really covers this pre-acquisition phase. And there are a number of different things that you are trying to do in that phase to understand whether the rematriation project really makes sense for your tribe. So the first thing is really understanding the characteristics of the property. That means getting out on the land, really understanding what the prior use has been, what the current use is, and what the use might be for you all in the future. So that's a really basic thing to do, but it's really understanding what the land is in its current state and what it might be in the future. Second is needing to ask the current property owner for all documents that really relate to the land. So that may be, have they applied for development permits in the past? Is there something that they were trying to do that they were either successful or not? Have they been in a fight with their neighbor and there's litigation pending? Have they been talking with a public agency about running a road through the property? So it's really trying to get all of those documents available about the property and really understanding what they mean. The third step in due diligence is called title review. Title refers to the documents that have been recorded against the property. So as Michelle talked about, there's a recorder's office in California. We use that as the repository to understand how land rights have changed over time. And title review means working either with a title insurer or directly with a recorder's office to understand what are the title issues with this property. What that means is, at a very basic level, a property owner can own a property free and clear, meaning that they There's no other third parties that have rights to use that property. I will say that is, in my 15 years of practice, I have never seen something come back and be like, oh, no exceptions. Instead, what usually happens is we actually share land quite a bit. And so on a single property, there might be recorded on title things like utility easements, right-of-ways for public roads, the right of your neighbor to use your well, the right of the public to navigate on a navigable river, etc. So there's going to be a whole host of title exceptions that you need to understand, both so that you can understand the potential risks that they pose to your use of the property, but also so you can better understand how the property is being used and whether it's going to serve the purposes that you want. An example of this right now that we see a lot of is there's very common utility easements on properties that usually say, you know, PG&E has a right to run a line of poles here, and cut all the vegetation under those poles. And you need to understand, does PG&E have the right to cut the area where we're hoping to use it for basketry materials? So really understanding what those other rights are on the property before you accept title, and trying to resolve any that you can. The other aspect of due diligence is really understanding who the current owner is and what property they actually have a right to. This is looking at what's called vesting, which is understanding who the current owners are. Property law is complicated in California, and you can have owners that are corporate entities, you can have ownership that's held in trust, you can have ownership that's of a title that's commonly called heirs property, where, you know, the property, someone died without a will and it's gone through probate, and now you have split ownership interests between many people. So understanding, is the person that's offered to sell me this land or give me this land the actual owner, or is it someone else? And who do we need to get sign off from? So that's part of due diligence. And then the next phase is an important one, and this is about understanding potential hazardous materials liability. So there's a very specific process used to understand this called environmental site assessments, commonly known as phase 1 and phase 2, where you have a certified person come out, investigate the property, tell you, is there potential for environmental contamination? What would be your potential liability were you to take ownership of this? This is one area where I feel very strongly that folks really need to figure out how to pay to get that work done so you can protect yourself against that. And then the last part of due diligence in this phase is really to understand those potential costs. Taxes that Michelle talked about are certainly one of them. Am I going to be able to qualify for a welfare exemption? Is my tribe going to take this into trust? How long will that process last? What will that stepped up basis be? And where are we going to get the funds to cover it? But also other types of costs. Is there infrastructure on the property that needs to be maintained on a regular basis? Are there fuel clearance requirements from your local jurisdiction that say you need to be cutting brush at a certain regular interval? What are those ongoing costs that are sort of the baseline for ownership that you need to figure out? Not only how are you going to pay potentially to acquire this property, but how are you going to fund that in the long term? So that's all in that pre-due diligence phase. In the post-due diligence phase, just to go very quickly here, the real things that you need to understand are, once you acquire this property, what are the potential risks to the tribe? So those risks can come from, could the property get damaged, flood, fire, etc.? Or could our use of this property cause harm to someone else? Could a tree fall and hit our neighbor's house? Could we be letting a ceremonial burn and there be an escape and cause damages? Thinking about those risks and really understanding how you're going to mitigate for them is important. There's ways of mitigating those through insurance products and then also through risk mitigation techniques. I'm going to try and go really quickly into, I was also asked to talk about setting up nonprofit land trusts. So the way that non-federally recognized tribes in California have typically thought to do rematriation for good reason is by setting up a nonprofit public benefit corporation. That is a two-step process. It involves setting up a public benefit corporation under California law, and going through the process of identifying your charitable purposes, setting up articles and bylaws, and getting those filed with the Secretary of State. From there, you can then apply for a tax exemption from the federal government. That's the code for that is the Internal Revenue Code section 501c3, which is why that nonprofit organizations also get called 501c3 organizations. So that's the steps of getting that set up. There's lots of benefits to this process. You have a clear corporate status. You're often eligible for grants that are not always eligible for non-federally recognized tribes or for federally recognized tribes. You have a preferred tax status, both in terms of the money that you bring in, but also what you're liable for. You also have preferred risk reduction, especially for board members. There's a whole bunch of benefits for nonprofit organizations found in the corporate code that would apply. The tribal land trust has different sovereign immunity concerns that can be a pro and a con. That's like a whole other panel, but I'm just going to put that out there. Happy to answer specific questions about it. But the cautions are also, I just want to say briefly, and then I'll hand this to Scott, is that for nonprofit land trusts that are associated with a federally or non-federally recognized tribe, you have to really think carefully about what the relationship between the tribe as a tribal entity is with that nonprofit organization. There's benefits to having them be very close because then the tribe has control over the nonprofit organization, but there are also risks associated with it being really closely tied because the nonprofit organization still has to meet all of the requirements to serve the public at large that are built into our existing structures. And so there's a delicate dance there between satisfying your obligations under state and federal law, but also serving your tribe. So I'm gonna stop there, hand this to Scott.
I'm Scott Williams, also a lawyer. Our firm works only for Indian tribes. They're our only clients. We work for the Haudenosaunee in New York State, and we work for tribes all over California and places in between. And we have a long relationship with one of the tribes in this room, the Yurok tribe, decades. And we have worked with tribes in California on land recovery projects for a long time. I'm going to do three things here. I'm going to focus on how a tribe might look internally at how to reacquire land. What are the various ways that the tribe can organize itself to do this? And then secondly, I'm going to give you an example of a land acquisition by a tribe in California, and then thirdly, a second different way that a tribe in California reacquired its land. So let me start with how a tribe organizes itself to do this. And there's basically three ways that we've seen tribes pull this off. One is that the Natural Resources Department of the tribe or the Housing Department of the tribe moves to acquire land. It's an arm of the tribe. No special circumstances there. Secondly, the tribe could form a land trust. Chairwoman this morning talked about a very impressive land trust in her Aboriginal territory. That can be done, and one of the examples I have for you today is of a tribe that did that. Thirdly, what Sarah was just talking about is a nonprofit corporation. And we have seen those, we have assisted tribes in establishing those nonprofits under California law. That's one way to do it. The tribe becomes subject to California nonprofit law, which is a disadvantage. Another way is to incorporate under Yurok law or Morongo law. Tribes have established corporation codes now, and we can take advantage of that. It's, in the outside world, it's a little different for people, but it's entirely possible, and it works. So there's three ways that the tribe can do that. And then next, we've listed some considerations that a tribe might want to take into account. How hard is it going to be to administer this? Do we have the capacity inside to hire the people we need to fund what we're doing here. It takes time. And I think, again, referring to Chairwoman's remarks this morning, a great deal of energy went into the acquisition of those lands. Secondly, Sarah mentioned this as well. If a tribe acquires land, that acquisition happens by a sovereign nation, which has sovereign immunity, and the tribe has complete control over the extent to which it might limit that immunity in the acquisition or not. If the tribe establishes a corporation under California nonprofit law, it's really hard to say that that's an arm of the tribe and is entitled to immunity. So the point here is the further away that entity gets from the tribe itself, the more exposed it is to the risks that come from losing the tribe's sovereign immunity. Costs, money. Both Sarah and Michelle have talked about that. Where not just the purchase price, but what else am I going to have to pay for? Lawyers, heaven forbid. Am I going to need help on this? And then, as Michelle pointed out, taxes and closing costs. We talked this morning, or we heard this morning about navigating the structures that have been set up by this society to make this hard. And they are certainly there, and it is certainly hard, but it's achievable. So money, that's an issue. And then the taxes that come from acquiring property, which Michelle mentioned, and then putting land into trust is something that both of them mentioned. If the goal of the tribe is to put property into trust, right now, the United States of America has made that hard if the land is encumbered, is burdened with, is attached to an easement of some sort, or a loan. The U.S. is much more willing to put land into trust if you own it free of any obligations. So these are the things that internally we want tribes to think about before they step into this process. So the next slide, please. I'm on part 2 now. This is the example. Some years ago, the Kashaya band of Pomo Indians on the Sonoma County coast were able to reacquire 600 acres of their ancestral land, and their chairman at the time, Reno Franklin, frequently said, "We are a coastal people without access to the coast." When their reservation was created, it was put up on the ridge, and the white people owned the land that you can see in the photograph. And one family offered the tribe 600 acres on the coast, connected to their reservation, for $6 million. And the tribe wasn't sitting on $6 million in the bank. The tribe had little discretionary revenue, not enough to pay a mortgage. So the question was, do we take a run at this or not? The leadership was very willing to do that, and they pursued partnerships, which was one of the examples of ways that were talked about this morning to acquire this land. You get it outright, you form a partnership, and do it through the partners. And that's what they did. Their questions were, who's out there with money, and who might be willing to work with us? And everybody that came up, that stepped up, had 2 characteristics. They were not Indians, with one exception, and they had no experience with Indians. So we heard this morning about how difficult it is for a tribe to educate the people you want to work with you, and I'm going to skip all of the hardships of forming those partnerships, and it was painful for everybody. But the end result was the tribe's goal for that land aligned perfectly with someone willing to purchase a conservation easement. And that meant no developments, no housing, open space, and it was, Kusha just walked in, and what I saw you come in, and what she, and you remember this morning what she said was one of their first questions is, what are you going to do with this land? And luckily in this case the answer was, we're going to do with it exactly what you would want someone to do with this land, because this is how we want to use it. So the conservation easement was a big chunk of that $6 million. And it's a Sonoma County agency that did this. They were willing to listen to the tribe on cultural activities. It was an unusually comfortable relationship. So the tribe also sold an easement to the California Coastal Commission, which is building a trail from Mexico to Oregon, and that trail will cross their bluffs, except they're going to shut it down for ceremonies. They went to private foundations and got money. And then there's one Indian entity on that list, and that's the Indian Land Capital Corporation. If you don't know them, I encourage you to get to know them. Their web address is up there. They closed about a $500,000 or $600,000 gap between the $6 million we needed and the money that the tribe raised elsewhere. A mortgage-free loan based on the good faith statement of the tribe that they would pay it back. No collateral, nothing. This is an established Indian-run lending institution based in Minnesota, and they have never had a default from any of the tribes that they have worked with over the years. And they are wonderful people to work with, and I encourage you to be in touch with them. The other recommendation I make here is that Trust for Public Land did exactly what was described this morning for a non-Indian organization which had never worked with a tribe. And that is, they came to the tribe and said, what do you want, Kashaya? And we will help you get there. And they did, to their credit. They earned the respect of the tribe, and in the process they learned to respect the tribe. My last point on this is that for the first time in 200 years, Kashaya had a ceremony on its land, its ancestral land. The elders went out, they found a spot that they thought was probably where their people, their ancestors had their celebrations. And as they cleared the land for the ceremony, they found evidence. I didn't ask, they didn't tell me what it was, that was in fact a ceremonial spot. And they invited all of those non-Indian entities that had helped them through this to that ceremony, and tribes from all over California came, and it was glorious. So, next slide. 1 minute. All right, that's the Kashaya Coastal Reserve. Next slide, please. This is Indian Island. The next example I want to give you, which I will summarize very quickly, is this. The Wiyot tribe chose a different path. They wanted Indian Island, as you heard this morning. It took decades to get it, but they succeeded in getting it. And they established eventually a tribal trust, land trust, the Dishkamu Humboldt Community Land Trust, created by the tribe, and it is an entity of the tribe. The tribe has authorized it to acquire land for the tribe, and the primary motivating factor here, let's go to the next slide, was that the tribe wanted to preserve its sovereign authority over the land trust, and it wanted the outside world to recognize the land trust as a part of the tribe itself. And they wanted to ensure that the tribe's sovereign immunity would never be limited or waived except by the authority of the tribal council itself. So this is a totally controlled tribal entity subject to the authority of the tribal leadership, the elected government. This is my last statement. I don't know where we are on the slides. I think we're done. Ooh, you recognize that, don't you, Councilman McCovey? One of my favorite photographs on Earth. That's the mouth of the Klamath River, and we're not talking about the Klamath right this second, but anyway, that's what that is. So here's my last statement. It's really hard to think about having to walk through this political and legal and financial maze to get back what belongs to you. And that was just exceedingly difficult for both Wiyot and Kashaya and others that we have worked with. But it's what we've got. We can't change everything all at once. And it is entirely possible to do this, whether or not you have a fat bank account or don't have a fat bank account. So thank you very much for being here. Thank you, Geneva, for organizing this and hosting this discussion. Thanks very much.
Thank you. I really appreciate all three of you breaking down very complex legal liability, financial considerations. It's very obvious this could be a whole day, a 2-day conference just to break down these in more detail. We are at lunch, but I wanted to get the vibe of the room. Did we want to have a Q&A? I'm sure there's questions. I'm seeing some head nods. Okay, so if folks are comfortable with that, maybe we can take the next 15, 20 minutes for a Q&A and then start lunch a little bit later. Does that feel okay? All right. We have a mic runner. Oh, thank you, Claire. And so who's got questions for our panel?
Hi, thank you. My name is Allie Metters Knight. I am from occupied Mechoopda territory, also known as Chico, California. I'm also, what I thought was really interesting, I love this panel. I'm executive director of a non-tribal land trust. I'm looking in pirating these years. So it's basically pirating a new land trust that's typically non-native, but I've got on executive director, we've made a native staff, and then I'm really interested in putting our board of directors back into local native hands. So this would, essentially, the plan is to rename all the land. Most of the land has been named after a white landowner, a shoe, certain names. So we're gonna list down and rename all of my tribal territory, all that land into tribal names. And then we have, California Land Trust has land in everyone's territory. And I'd like to work with all those tribes to give them, to work on getting that land back to them under their names through California Open Lands, and then use this mechanism of pirating a non-tribal land trust. And so I'm interested in looking at this this is very interesting scenario of pirating. And I call it pirating because I was never meant to be here. I was never meant to run all this land, but I just happened to be in that. And the board of directors, they're not really acclimated or known about TEK, traditional land knowledge, traditional ecological knowledge on the land and the methodologies that we do for land tending. So I've been able to open up workshops, but this meeting right here and showing this mechanism kind of didn't have the pirating scenario. And so I'm just wanting to hear from the lawyers, like, can we successfully pirate a non-tribal land trust and turn it over and all the lands back to the people?
Well, why don't we think about it? Maybe the question of like, how do we switch
I don't know,
over
do you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. I just want to make sure I understand how you're using the term pirating. So what I heard you say was that an existing traditional land trust was set up, And through gumption, luck, you ended up as the executive director. Am I understanding that? Okay. And so, I mean, in my view, nonprofit organizations are incredibly flexible tools. You have the ability to change your articles of incorporation and your bylaws with the agreement of your board of directors. You also have the ability to influence the composition of your board of directors over time to get to a place where that board would move to do the things that you would hope it would do. But you still have to operate within the confines of state and federal law. So there may be things that you wish to do that run against that, and that's where I see the rub. But this is the second organization that I've heard of that has done this pirating term, although I haven't heard that word used before, and I think it's very interesting, and it also lets you step in and immediately have resources and assets in a way that you wouldn't if you were starting something from scratch. So, do you have something to add?
Yeah. I'm on a board of directors for an entity that holds a lot of nature preserves, but and once you get on that side of it, it's like, wow, they don't know anything, and they don't know how the resources that they have, and how do you even begin? But the concern that I have, I think, is you're not a director, but directors, we owe a duty to the entity. And so while the legal documents can shift, that's going to require the board of directors to make those decisions. The executive director can't make those decisions on themselves. And depending upon the scope of the endowment, there's significant financial liability there that and the board of directors are going to have lawyers, most likely, that are going to be warning the board of directors about what they can or can't do. And the problem is the directors are personally liable for decisions that are made that are contrary to whatever applicable law. So, whether they know that or not, they are, and so it just depends. There's a lot to unpack with that idea, but I definitely understand how one would want to consider that. I mean, the board that I'm on, I'm just trying to educate them about NAGPRA, because they have a collection, and they also, a lot of the lands that were in their holdings were pre-AB 52, and so the tribes didn't have their mitigation, and they weren't connected to the land through the legal paperwork from the original acquisition. And so depending on whether it's a pre-2013 acquisition versus a post-2013 acquisition, the land trust is going to have documents that are going to be really different. So I would just caution on the trust duties of the board of directors, but yes, the documents can be amended, which would require their vote.
Thank you. Monahu, my name's Terry Redall, and I'm the executive director of the Owens Valley Indian Water Commission. But I had a question about the welfare exemption for property taxes. And then, Mr. Williams, you had mentioned, an entity can be incorporated nonprofit underneath a tribe. So can you be incorporated under a tribe as a nonprofit and qualify for the property tax welfare exemption? Or do you have to be incorporated under the state? That's the first question. Number two, maybe to Geneva, is there any work being done in California state property law to be a workaround these difficulties that we have as tribal consortia and tribes acquiring land and having to pay taxes? And then number three, we need to do something about insurance in California. It's very hard to get, especially for tribes.
So the question about whether the tribe can incorporate under the tribal law and then fall under the exemption is, I don't know. Tribes are. This is an evolving area, but I definitely am working on something like that. But one of the challenges is that the purposes have to match the purposes of the nonprofit rules, and the uses have to line up. So I don't know. We haven't gotten I haven't received an OCC for a tribally incorporated nonprofit, but that's the next frontier. And then having the tribe be okay with restricting the uses to comply with the regular reporting, because it has to be done annually. So those are some of the restrictions and obligations, but the benefit could be pretty substantial. So it would depend upon whether it was worth it, I would think. You want to talk?
I can just say briefly that the insurance market is a mess. The one plug I will make is that if you are particularly interested in using fire, the state has set up a prescribed fire claims fund that covers both traditional prescribed fire and cultural burning, and that is a mechanism for getting up to $2 million per project in insurance coverage. So there is that one tiny little bright spot in that fire area. So.
Hello, everyone. My name is Mona Tucker, Tribal Chair for the Yaktichu Teacher Yaktalhini, Northern Chumash in San Luis Obispo County. And my question is in the context of a non-federally recognized tribe with a 501c3. We have a tribe and our 501c3 is our sister entity, and their sole purpose is for the betterment of the tribe. But my question is about the welfare exemption, because if we buy anything in San Luis Obispo County, you know, the cost of elevated property taxes based on a new assessment, which everyone thinks is 1%, but it's not. It's 1% plus something. What has been the success rate of a tribe like mine achieving the welfare exemption from property tax?
It sounds like you would qualify as long as you meet those 4 criteria. Yeah. Yeah.
The Board of Equalization, I'm sure they're very, very particular. It's like they have this document that's like the language has to be exactly like this, and often if you have older articles, they're not quite like that. So it may take some work, but I agree.
Real quickly, Robert Gomez here, Chairman for the Tabata tribe in Kern County. We operate as a 501c, and we recently acquired 1,200 acres. And we applied for that welfare. One of the things that the Department of Equalization made us do was add an addendum to our bylaws. And so we did that, and we're in the process of getting our exemption. It's relatively easy when you go through the department, but it just takes time. It takes time. So hopefully we'll be getting the exemption. One question I had, in the land that we have in terms of water rights, the question has come up pre-1914 water rights versus post-1914. Can you give me a clarification on that? Because we're having an issue, not so much an issue, but we want to be prepared to do our due diligence and homework, blah, 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 in terms of water rights that we think we can acquire from the federal government.
That's a doozy. I think that's the only sensible thing that I can think of to say is that the question of water rights is complicated. Pre-1914 rights means that the water rights were acquired prior to California developing its water code and then issuing permits for water rights. And then post-1914 means California controlled the issuance of the water rights. Everybody likes pre-1914 rights because they're usually stronger and older. But my suggestion, pardon? Curtailed less, yes, thank you. So I think the suggestion would be to get somebody who knows water to look at the terms of the purchase and help the tribe figure out exactly what you acquired and what might need to be done to make sure that your water rights are secure.
Yeah, and I would, it's all, the devil's in the details with on the title. So I always want, before my clients buy land, and now they've learned please send it to me before you buy the land. Like, give me time before you buy the land. Because we need to look at the preliminary title report and we need to look at all the encumbrances. And if there's water, we're going to know. If there's easements that take the water, we're going to know. If there's reserved into the federal government, we're going to know, because it's all going to be on the title report. So that would be the first practical step that I would, besides getting a lawyer that knows about water law. And there's a few of them. And Scott, I'm sure, has done his share of water work. And you would want to pull the title report and see what's encumbered on it and what's taken already.
Back up a little bit. We do have the water rights for our section of the land, which comes out of the mountain, the spring. I want my cake and eat it too. The land just adjacent to us of the next creek comes out of Forest Service land.
It sounds like you really need to talk to somebody specific. This is so specific. I don't know that, yeah, you're going to need to, that would be our recommendation, that you sit down with somebody and walk them through that. These aren't fact patterns that we're going to be able to tell you what to do. Yeah, they're too complicated.
And Chair, I'd be very happy to introduce you to the tribal liaison at the water boards. The water boards is the state agency that looks at and does water rights, and so they can also provide some resources. So be very happy to do that introduction. So I know that we're at overtime now. I'm sure folks are hungry. So I wanted to just, oh man, we've got a lot of hands. I'm wondering if folks feel comfortable breaking for lunch, and then those that have questions, if the panelists don't mind. Yeah. Yes.
So, and what can change? There's some. I've been working on a tax bill proposal. I'm going to be presenting it in a couple of weeks in this legislative process, where we would have some new property tax exemptions and documentary transfer tax exemptions. So that's how we change things, okay? As we get to the end of all this, we have the problems, and then the solutions are that we have to make amendments to state law. So to the extent you're participating in legislative affairs with your tribe, as information comes out in the next year, hopefully we get something proposed this year, this coming session. It might take 2 years, I don't know. I was hoping to have some slides about it, but I've misplaced them. But we do have drafts already, and we being me, me, myself, and I. But I'm proposing them to the Board of Equalization and Franchise Tax Board, and we'll see if we can get some legs underneath those bills to get them moving. And so if you see it and you want to support it, that's how we do it.
Well, thank you. Can we give another round of applause to our panelists? Time and being here. Thank you so much for our amazing panelists for breaking down some of these complex issues. And we'll be coming back to this room at 1 o'clock. Thank you, everyone.